The purpose of today's meeting is to continue a series of engagements examining the direct provision system and the international protection application process. We are joined from the Irish Refugee Council by Nick Henderson, Chief Executive Officer, and Rosemary Hennigan, Policy and Advocacy Officer, and you're both very welcome here this morning. And from the Movement of Asylum Seekers in Ireland, we are joined by Lucky Kambule, the Group Coordinator, by Bulelani Nfako. I'm doing my best, and mine won't be any easier for you, I assure you. Donna Vuma, Tina Ndlovu, I'm getting close, good, thank you. Rosemary Kunine, Rosemary. Christopher Sibanda, and Babs Leonard, who are all members of Massey. And you're all very, very welcome here this morning. I will shortly invite you to make your respective opening statements, those you have nominated to do so. But before I do, I have to advise you of the situation in relation to privilege coming before an Oireachtas committee. First, I must draw your attention to the situation in relation to privilege. Please note that you are protected by absolute privilege in respect of the evidence you are to give to the committee. However, if you are directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter only to a qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you are asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that, where possible, you should not criticise nor make charges against any person or persons or entity by name or in such a way as to make him or her or it identifiable. And members of the committee should be aware that under the salient rulings of the Chair, members should not comment on, criticise or make charges against a person outside the House or an official by name in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. Before inviting the first of the contributors, I just want to again remind people to please have your mobile phones switched off. They do interfere with the recording equipment here in the committee rooms. So I'll commence as I've introduced you and invite Mr. Henderson to make his opening statement. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation to present to the committee. The Refugee Council help people seeking asylum, and we are a charity. We give information, provide early legal advice, help people to access employment and education, help young people, and support people to leave direct provision through our housing project. We also advocate for improvements to the housing, to the direct provision, to the asylum process. It's been a consistent call of the Irish Refugee Council that direct provision should end. Moreover, politicians across the spectrum, international bodies, other NGOs, and most importantly, people living in the direct provision system have called for it to end. There are countless articles, reports, and testimonies of what is wrong with this system. The fact that Geoffrey Shannon, the Special Rapporteur on Child Protection, has called on Ireland to abolish direct provision, and that the Ombudsman, as recently as yesterday, said that it is not a suitable long-term accommodation for those waiting on an asylum claim, should alone, in our view, be enough to bring about wholesale and radical change. Direct provision is already, unfortunately, a chapter in Ireland's long and dark history of institutional living. Unfortunately, we believe this system has worsened in recent months, particularly in the context of emergency centres. A grave concern that we have is that the short-term emergency system becomes entrenched, and this makes the implementation of any change harder. If direct provision ends, something has to go in its place. The bottom lines of any new system, in our view, should include own door accommodation, the opportunities to cook for oneself, to live in a community, and to work. We actually think this model could be agreed upon more easily than possibly others think. And from discussions with the Reception and Integration Agency, I do believe they are open to change. However, we believe that the much bigger challenge lies in how that new model could be actually delivered. We are very doubtful that existing providers can deliver that model, nor can the current procurement process, which is being rolled out over 2019. The system is broken, and it's costing too much for too little. We know that it needs change, so how do we get to that new system? Firstly, in our view, we should consider accommodation of people seeking asylum as a housing issue, not to draw on funds from existing housing resources, but to take a housing policy approach. The Department of Justice is, in our view, not equipped to design policy like this, and the responsibility should not lie with them. Secondly, we should use the budget that exists, but to do so more strategically. The government has only built 3 accommodation centres in 18 years. The majority of existing centres were originally designed for other purposes. The state should procure fit-for-purpose accommodation to meet particular needs. We believe this will be a cost saver in the long term. Aidan O'Driscoll, Director General of the Department of Justice and Equality, said to this committee just a few weeks ago that the spend on direct provision in 2019 will likely reach between 95 to 100 million. In 18 years, over 1.2 billion has been paid to private providers of accommodation. Spending money, and let me be clear about this, spending money on providing people with asylum is a good thing, but it should be done strategically to the benefit of people in that system and also to the wider public. Thirdly, and linked to this is a fundamental criticism of the system so far, has been that it has been reliant on for-profit actors. Private providers are not social workers or public servants. They can't and aren't, in our view, meeting the complex needs of people living in centres. That responsibility is a public obligation of the state. We have many housing bodies in Ireland that are non-profit, work to a particular mission and have strengths and expertise. We believe that those bodies could be best placed to provide accommodation. But for this to happen, the procurement process has to change. Longer lead-in times, longer contracts, funding for capital and conversion costs, and a reduction in the number of people that a provider must be able to accommodate. Current procurement models require any provider to accommodate 50 or more people. We believe, and from meeting with approved housing bodies, they say to us that this risks perpetuating the congregated model, the model of congregated living, and it's difficult to procure buildings of this size. Fourthly, direct provision isn't just about the bricks and mortars. Reduce delays in the system by giving resources to decision makers, increase legal aid at pre-decision so applications are better prepared, and make the right to work broader and allow for integration from the moment somebody arrives. This model has been developed successfully in Scotland. Finally, there needs to be greater engagement on this issue from all government departments, and this was emphasised by the head of UNHCR, Enda O'Neill, last week. Moreover, the Department of Justice could work much better within itself. 6 bodies, the International Protection Office, the International Protection Appeals Tribunal, the Legal Aid Board, the Reception and Integration Agency, the Ministerial Decisions Unit of the Irish Naturalisation and Immigration Service are all under the ambit of the Department of Justice, but they could work better. To put this into a practical example, the Legal Aid Board, in our view, isn't supported enough to ensure that everyone has a well-prepared application to the International Protection Office. This means more complicated appeals for the Protection Appeals Tribunal to deal with. If someone is recognised as a refugee, there are currently long delays in the issuing of the Declaration of Refugee Status by the Ministerial Decisions Unit. This means that people spend longer in the direct provision system, which means the system becomes more overcrowded, which puts pressure on the Reception and Integration Agency and makes people be accommodated in emergency centres. Even then, there are not enough appointments issued by the INIS for a residency card. Each step, there are hurdles requiring intensive interventions and supports. It doesn't need to be this difficult, and systematic change is key. Our submission that we'll make to the committee in writing will go into more detail on all of the above. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll now go on to Mr. Caoimhghín on behalf of Massey. Would you like to make the opening statement, please?
All right, Burelandewe is nominated.
That's absolutely okay. You're going to share, is that it?
No,
Oh, no, you're taking the lead. Very good. Thank you.
All right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you to Mr. Chairperson and to the committee for inviting us. The movement of asylum seekers in Ireland is a platform for asylum seekers to join together in unity and purpose. The group is made up of people who are directly affected by the system of direct provision, and as people who are currently undergoing the international protection application process, we, unlike experts and NGOs, are uniquely placed to offer direction to the Joint Committee on Justice and Equality on many issues that you've asked us to comment on. The content and the recommendations in our submissions that we will be making are all directly informed by the experiences of our members, asylum seekers, the people who live their day-to-day lives in the abhorrent system of direct provision. The purpose of our submission is to gather their collective experiences to inform the committee and to make a series of key proposals that would make the Irish asylum system compatible with minimum human rights standards. Human rights are not gifts. We don't view human rights as a gift that governments bestow on people. They are rights and entitlements that we all possess by virtue of being human beings. People cannot be treated as less than others, and indeed less than human, merely because of their differences in nationality and citizenship. In May 2017, the Supreme Court told the Department of Justice and Equality that asylum seekers, we can rely on constitutional protections that affect us as human beings. That simply means the fundamental human rights are not reserved for Irish, EU, or other legally resident nationals living in Ireland. And that an asylum seeker child does not have to be an Irish for the best interest of the child to prevail. Therefore, it cannot be in the best interest of the child to ban a parent from working. There are children in direct provision forced to grow up in state-sponsored poverty as their parents are unable to provide for their material needs. Many of them are too ashamed to tell their friends in school where they live. In a direct provision centre in Kildare, children dumped their sandwiches underneath their seats on the bus because they were too ashamed to be carrying the same sandwich every day for school for lunch. A mother once told an Irish court that she had to sell sexual favours in direct provision centres in order to support a child while living in direct provision. The asylum system must uphold and vindicate the fundamental human rights of all international protection applicants, including family rights, the right to privacy, the right to education, the right to work. The best interest of the child must prevail. Vulnerable persons must be looked after. LGBT+ rights, women's rights, and the right to religious freedom. We receive so many texts from distressed asylum seekers. One such text was from a woman who had spent about 5 years living in direct provision, and she was ostracized for having HIV. She had no privacy to take her medication. As soon as roommates found out that the pills were for, people started gossiping about her. Another text we received was from a queer woman who was told by the International Protection Office that she was not credible. Thus, her application for asylum was rejected. That means the IPO believes she's lying about her sexual orientation and wants her to prove it. She is not the only LGBT+ applicant to be treated in such a manner. That dehumanizing practice of assuming asylum seekers are lying must stop. The role of asylum system is to vindicate people's rights to seek asylum and to live in safety in Ireland and not to dehumanize them. The rights of the child and protection of children in the international protection system must be priority for the asylum system. And undocumented minors who turn 18 before receiving a final decision on the asylum claim must be supported to live independently and not be shipped off to direct provision centres. Deportations are brutal and dehumanizing and can have no part of an ethical and human rights-centered approach to the asylum and migration system. That's why a lot of people commit suicide in direct provision centres. Some attempt to commit suicide because they fear that they might be deported, especially when you're getting letters from the Department of Justice that say your application has been rejected. A lot of people who are taking sleeping pills in direct provision struggle to sleep for the fear that their next letter in the post could be a deportation order. We also believe that no child born in Ireland, in the asylum system or undocumented, should ever be served with a deportation order. The Minister for Justice and Equality can, should and must introduce a scheme to regularise undocumented people in Ireland with long-term residency for all children born in the state to non-EU parents. That's not asking too much, not asking them to make them all citizens, just regularization so that their people can get on with their lives. They are already living here. People seeking protection in Ireland are entitled to live an independent life with their families in accommodation that upholds the rights to privacy, dignity and integrity of the person. The warehousing of asylum seekers in direct provision centres across the country without certainty of time for stays amounts to an effective incarceration, as an asylum seekers are divorced from social, economic and political life of the country in the same manner as prisoners in Montjoy prison. Our key recommendations are that the legal process has to be reformed. The process of seeking asylum is first and foremost a legal process, so it is essential that people receive all the necessary legal advice, that the system is oriented towards vindicating people's rights to seek asylum and safety. The right to work must be immediate and unrestricted for all people seeking protection in Ireland. At present, people who are on appeal are unable to work. They are excluded from working. People should be accommodated in reception for no longer than 3 months before moving into housing in the community. We don't believe that people should be segregated and living in centres. We believe that people should be living in communities along with everybody else in Ireland. Direct provision should be abolished and people seeking asylum should have access to the same housing supports via their local authorities, as is the case for others. Full and tuition-free access to education, training, and all levels must be available to international protection applicants, because if you keep a person for 5 years in direct provision and you give them a letter after 5 years to say, well, you can go and live in your life in Ireland, where do you expect the person to start living? These recommendations are not insurmountable for the Irish government. Uganda has over 1 million refugees, and it's one of the poorest countries on earth. We are human beings, like everybody, like all of you. All we ask is that we be treated as such. The very fact that people have to ask the government to treat them humanely should shame all of you. Thank you very much. I'll pause there and we'll take questions.
Thank you very much. We'll now move on to members and their respective questions, observations. The first to indicate that I noted anyway is Deputy Jack Chambers, please.
Thanks, Chair. I'd like to thank both of you for excellent presentations and submissions. My first question is regarding the model that was mentioned and transitioning from the Department of Justice to approved housing bodies and the lack of synchronicity and the strategic approach. What would be the state oversight of, say, an approved housing body approach, and would that be true? For example, we've difficulty, say with the Department of Housing and the Customs House about a lot of issues with housing policy. Where would the funding stream be delivered through, or what would be the oversight mechanism to try and deliver that synchronicity? Because I agree with you. I think, you know, as you said, over €1 billion over a multiplicity of years, and we've nothing to show for it in terms of state spending apart from profit for private providers. How do we deliver, I suppose, a very well thought out approach, as you mentioned in your statement?
Firstly, it would be that we'd use the existing budget, which is large. Yeah. Secondly, it may be that the Department of Housing, and I suspect they will say this, would want nothing to do with this issue. Therefore, it may be necessary to take it away from the Reception and Integration Agency, take it away from the Department of Justice, but create a new independent entity, or create a new body and attach it to the Department of Housing, but ring-fence the funding so there are no accusations or thoughts that this is actually taking anything away from the Department of Housing's resources or local authorities' resources. Secondly, in terms of maintaining oversight, we believe that could be done relatively easily. We were about to produce a piece of work around the public sector duty, and we believe that the state can maintain and require of both private operators of current direct provision centres and any future operators, they can embed in human rights protection via the public sector duty that's contained in the Human Rights and Equality Act. And thirdly, I suppose that the idea would be that these approved housing bodies are experts in housing and also experts in providing care and assistance to vulnerable people. So you're already guaranteeing oversight. The organisations that would have a board, that would have a strategic plan, that would have a clear mission. So you're embedding in good quality, hopefully, through those mechanisms.
That's a fair point, and I think, as you know, I suppose it's just when a budget is allocated, or if it's given to an approved housing body or bodies, it would have to come through a specific department. I think I agree. It would have to be through some agency that manages to ring fence the funding, so you don't have pull from other areas. Just in terms of your own statement, it was very moving, and obviously you've highlighted a contradiction where we've human rights abuses from countries that people are coming from, but we're replacing one set of human rights abuses with our own domestic set of difficulties where we're not vindicating human rights, and that's a profound contradiction that I think we need to resolve domestically. So I acknowledge that. Just one issue that was raised last week I think is important, and perhaps some of you can give feedback on this, is obviously the right to work and the constitutional precedent that's been set now from the Supreme Court. How has there been any improvement on that, or feedback in terms of people being able to work, and perhaps you can just give us some maybe update on how that's being how things have changed since that judgment, or is it still a difficult threshold to meet?
It's still difficult for a lot of people who have been in direct provision for a long time, because when they introduced the labour market access permit, it was only to be issued to people who have been awaiting a first instance decision for about 9 months. That immediately excluded a lot of people who already had decisions who were on appeal, and we know that there are people who go through an appeal for years and years. We had one lady who went through an appeal for about 8 years before she was granted refugee status. So in that time that she was unable to work, she had a legitimate claim to asylum, but they botched the initial refusal. They botched the initial decision at the IPO. So we have a lot of people in that situation, in direct provision, who aren't legally allowed to work, so they can never work until they have a final decision under the current arrangements. And you also have a lot of restrictions in terms of the permit itself. It's a piece of paper. Ordinarily, employers in Ireland, when they are hiring people to work for them, especially non-EU nationals, they are looking for an Irish residency permit card or the old GNIB card. Asylum seekers do not have that, and therefore cannot even get a driving license because they don't have the Irish residency permit card. In one of our submissions, in one of our recommendations that we'll be making to the committee, is that they should replace the temporary residency card that is issued, the blue card that is issued, because it's of no use to an asylum seeker except to inform a police officer or an immigration officer that they have permission to stay in Ireland, but they can't use it to go and work. Whereas if you bring asylum seekers in line with other non-EU nationals resident in Ireland, you are able to then immediately inform the potential employer that this person has the right to work. They don't have to do all the other go through all the other administrative barriers, such as having to submit reports, and they are told in the permit itself, right on the front page of the permit, that it is a criminal offence not to provide this report. If you're required to provide a report within 10 days, it's a criminal offence, and that's a deterrent to many employers. I personally have gone through that process of having to explain to employers that the permit is renewable, but a lot of them don't take that. One informed me that they need a person who should have at least the permit should at least be valid for 11 months, and they will not take it if it's only valid for 6 months. And people can stay in the asylum system for longer than a year, waiting for an interview for the asylum claim to be assessed. So the idea of making the permit to be valid only for 6 months doesn't really make much sense for a person who's going to be stuck in the system anyway. It would be better for us to have it valid for at least 12 months, because we know it takes longer for the Department of Justice to make a decision on that. So when they issued the permits, they issued, by September 2018, they had issued over 1,500 permits, and only 330 or so people were able to actually find work. So people, when they find work, they have to declare to the Department of Justice that they have found work. They send their declaration. Only 300 people did. That highlights the restrictions. I've had the permit since the 1st of August, and I've only worked for 1 hour since then, since the 1st of August 2018, and I've only worked for 1 hour. All the employers that I have previously worked for in the Republic of Ireland on different permit have not hired me because of that, the restrictions on the permit itself. Not that I don't meet the requirement, because I've had those 3 jobs before and I've done them well. Their references would substantiate that, but it becomes very restrictive for people, and it discourages others who are already in the system, who qualify for the permit. A lot of people don't apply for it because they see people who have it not working. The hoops that you have to jump through to have to explain to an employer how the permit works, because a lot of employers don't know how it works. It's different. It's not the same as everybody else goes in with a GNIB card or an Irish residency permit card or an EU passport, and we don't have any of those things. So it is restrictive in that sense. So a lot of people would still be stuck in direct provision without the right to work. And our recommendation to address that would be that people are given access to the labour market immediately when they arrive in the state, because then it increases their prospects of integration. It means that a person is not going to be staying idle in a direct provision centre that's in a remote area like Knocklashin or Mount Trenchard in Foynes, where they have no access to public transport, for example. That's another barrier for people who want to work. So once you have a job, it might become difficult to actually get to work if you live in a direct provision centre that doesn't have any access to public transport.
And my final question, Chair, is, I suppose you mentioned, say, the reliance, for example, on sleeping tablets because of the difficulties with accommodation and how, having to live a life in a country that's similar to prisoners in Mountjoy Prison. I think that's a stark reminder about the sheer shocking level of human rights abuses in our direct provision centres that's ongoing. Just in terms of mental health services, and I'm slightly alarmed that I suppose if our mental health services are, providing for a plaster approach in terms of sleeping tablets, what's the experience of people living in direct provision in terms of mental health services and support on that basis, or do you have any suggestions on how that can be improved?
Who would like to take the question?
Okay.
Please. Yeah.
Thank you. So in terms of the mental health and the sleeping tablets issue that we raised there, mental health is a serious issue for people living in direct provision. The biggest problem, I think, is that there is no services at all that are being provided to us in the centres. So in order for you to be able to access the help that you need, you would have to be going to your GP, for example, to be able to, say, get the help or get directed to where you can get the help that you need. Now, the biggest problem with that is that we already know that many people coming in to seek asylum are obviously from traumatic backgrounds or have experienced some kind of trauma. So that service would be crucial and vital to have, for example, at the reception centres. The only thing that's there at the moment is 1 or 2 posters, maybe in the centre, signposting you to places, for example, like the Samaritans, or to Spirasi, which you also have to get an appointment through referral from your solicitor or from your GP. And often that takes a very long time to even get that appointment to be seen by Spirasi. This is why we find that a lot of people tend to turn to things like sleeping tablets or to alcohol. They develop a lot of addictions, such as gambling addictions, because they're trying to find a way to cope with living in that situation. So I recommend, okay, Lucky might give the recommendation.
Just to add on that, Deputy, the signs, the indications are there in terms of the effects of mental health in direct provision. In recent times, the suicide attempts that have increased in the past, say, 18 months. Last year alone, there were about 5 deaths in direct provision, some in relation to mental health, and it's people that were actually on these sleeping pills. So we feel, this is not qualified, obviously, that the provision of the tablets in terms of addressing the mental health issue is the wrong one. The psychological traumas that people do face in direct provision are the things that need to be, addressed in a very, very serious way. Otherwise, we will see more deaths happening in direct provision because we ignore the signs that are there on mental health issues. And a fresh example, about a month or so ago, of a lady that attempted suicide in a center, in one of the centers here in the country, even leaving a message to be sent to a manager of that center to take care of the babies in her absence. And she had history of mental health illness, and we are not addressing that. Instead, we are punishing people for the actions that they take without understanding what people go through. It's a serious matter, and it is something that needs to be taken seriously. As my colleague said earlier, that people already come with those experiences of trauma. And also the other problem that people face is that they need prescription to get the depression pills. The fact that some don't have access to medical cards make it hard for them to even access those pills if they've been prescribed, because it takes time for them to get those medical cards.
Sorry, please.
It's also very important for us to remember that there's children as well that are experiencing significant mental health issues. I'll speak from a personal experience on this. I have 3 children myself, and my youngest is 9 years old. Over the past few months, he has been showing signs of depression to the point that he has come to me and said to me, sometimes when I feel sad, I feel like killing myself. This is a 9-year-old that is saying this to me. So I'm already facing my own personal mental health challenges, but now I have to face the extra burden of these children that see me going through this and are possibly experiencing their own mental health issues because of the situation that we're in, or because of, seeing this from me. So it's very important that we consider that children do not be overlooked as well, and that there's mental health services that are focused on the children as well.
Thank you. Deputy Chambers, you finished?
Finished just to say that thanks for your contributions, and it's shocking, as you've said, that we're not providing any wraparound help or support or intervention for people in those very difficult situations, and it's a total failure by the state, and that's why we're examining this issue, and hopefully we can support you in this. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Chambers. Deputy Jim O'Callaghan, please.
Thanks, Chairman. Thanks, everyone, for coming in, and thank you for the submissions you've given to the committee. Obviously, as Jack said, we have to prepare a report, and I suppose what's good about this is we're hearing the direct experiences of people who, I suppose, have been involved in direct provision. Are all of you still in direct provision, or are many of you in direct provision? And are you all in the same part of the country, or where are you, Donna?
I'm in Oireachtas.
Okay. And are the rest of you still in direct provision, or in different parts of the country?
I'm still in direct provision, and I live in Mosney.
Yeah, what about yourself, Rosemary?
I'm from Wickleys.
Yeah, okay.
From the Viking House and
Okay. Like, what's your, Tina, what's your direct experience of it? Has it been a very negative experience for you, or what do you think could be done to change it, just from your experience in the system?
Okay, thank you so much for this opportunity.
No problem.
I will talk from my personal perspective and what I've come across and what has happened in my life, the impacts, the negativity that I've faced in my life. When you come into this country, you already carry your own burdens, as my other colleagues have said. the trauma that we face from where we're coming from.
Where did you come from, too?
I'm from Zimbabwe originally.
Okay, yeah.
And, you know, I always followed the talks, the live talks and everything, the comments. As you haven't been through the trauma, you won't understand. So what people seem to be, the people don't understand the events or the things that happen in direct provision. Mm-hmm. I have suffered depression. I have 3 kids. I have migraine. I've almost had stroke because of the situations that I always face. My kids have been bullied in school. I have been through the TUSLA social services because my child was bullied at school, and it turned around to be like my son was in the wrong. So there was a point at some time that my kids will be taken away from me. There was a recent incident that I had with my daughter as well, that she opened someone's top in school, and I tried to explain to the teacher, but she couldn't understand. So I've set up a meeting to go and tell her that, you know, these are kids. When they are at school, you are the parent. Mm-hmm. When they are at home, I am the teacher. We must work hand in hand. There was once an incident of a woman who tried to commit suicide. I was there. I saw it. How the kids were, the reaction of the kids.
And how long have you been in the direct provision?
3.5 years now.
3.5 years, okay.
Yes.
And the process, you're obviously going through the process, and there's been no determination in respect of your application, has there?
No, at the moment I'm on deportation.
Okay. Yeah. And like your kids, are they in the same room as you, or do they have a separate?
Yes,
okay.
we are in the same. It's a three-bedroom house.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's, you know, irregardless of the small spaces, but at least they've got their separate rooms, unlike the other places out of Mosney.
Yeah, okay.
The lady who tried to commit suicide was being given a single room with 4 beds, and with a child who has a condition. So how do you let a mother with a child with I can't remember what the actual problem is with the child? With TB, in a cramped room.
Okay.
A child needs a room with proper ventilation. Yes.
Do many of you know people who have left direct provision and who've gone on into Irish society, and have they had difficulties getting accommodation or getting work? Lucky, do you know many people?
Well, I'm that person.
Okay.
I've left that direct provision since 2016. Now, it's a tough transition to move from direct provision, and I had that first-hand experience of. Firstly, we have to look for the house, and it's very hard to find a house, and you have to go on with your life. You don't know which direction you need to take. So the gap that what I picked up with regard to that is the lack of support while I was in direct provision, to know what is it that can be set up for me to succeed as quick as possible in society. All right, and I didn't have a problem with the language. You're looking at it from a point of view of a person who has a problem with the language. How will that person, you know, stay in direct provision for 5 years and then move on with no support? There isn't support that much in terms of transition from direct provision to live your normal life. I'm fortunate it took me a year to find a place to stay on my own. My activities are around in Dublin. I had to go all the way to Wicklow to find a place. And fortunately, I now work as well. So my life is on the positive side, but it is a very hard transition.
Yeah, and do you think there should be more support? I suppose we're looking at people in direct provision here and the supports that are required for that. But I would have thought after people leave as well, there's a need for them to have support.
There is a need, because remember, when the setup of direct provision is that there isn't much interaction, especially depending on where the center is. That is also a fact. To me, I would say I wouldn't really look into my situation, because I put myself there in terms of being active. So it was easy for me to integrate, after direct provision. And there is that need to support people who are moving from direct provision. But the support needs to start from while people are still there, in terms of education, in terms of being in the community. You can't start building a community when a person has lost the will to live, the zeal, by virtue of being in direct provision. Life has to start from day one a person comes in Ireland, not to start at the time when the person is approved of his or her application. Mm-hmm. Starts late to start the life.
Too late then.
It's very, very late.
Yeah, okay. Like I suppose both organisations who are represented here have recommended that direct provision be abolished. I think that's the word both of you used. Obviously, as a committee, if we're going to make a recommendation like that, we need to figure out, well, what's going to replace it, because we have an obligation for people who come to the country who are seeking protection. We have an obligation to provide shelter and, comfort and accommodation. But am I to take it, and maybe Nick, you're the person to answer this, you think that people who come for that it's a housing problem? And would you have concerns about the fact that, we can't really sort out the housing problem in the country at present?
It's not necessarily that it's a housing problem. It's just that for 20 years we've considered accommodating asylum seekers as something that should be dealt with via the Department of Justice on through a very narrow remit, using private providers, using old buildings on the outskirts of towns. We believe that should change. Of course, we have to provide accommodation for people who come here. The population of direct provision is around 6,500. If you take away people who can't leave, that would take you down to more like 5,500. If you reduce backlogs and delays in decision making, you could possibly get that down to more something like 5,500. It's not a large amount of people. Secondly, if you use, as I say, the budget that is there, and you engage different providers, better providers, to provide that accommodation, you begin to get the building blocks of a new system. And if you have that bottom line, and I would implore the committee to go with this, if you have a bottom line of own door accommodation, of the right to cook for oneself and one's family, of a broader right to work, to live in a community, if those are the red lines that we want, and then you start to design a procurement process that allows housing bodies or other new entities to provide that accommodation, again, then you're starting to build towards a new system. There is a current procurement process. You can look at it on e-tenders. It's timetabled to go through the different regions of Ireland over 2019, but a crucial problem with that, as I say, is that it requires a provider to have a property of more than 50 or more beds. Every housing body that we've worked with, and our colleagues from Massey, who have lived in the system, would say if you put 50 people in one building, that is going to be problematic sooner or later. So we need to think of redesigning that procurement process.
Okay. So what you say is that really the state should be constructing its own accommodation that's exclusively for people who are seeking asylum?
It may choose to build accommodation, and that's
it.
And also procure and purchase it, or engage with approved housing bodies to develop existing accommodation that they may have, for those bodies to buy or purchase new accommodation or convert accommodation that they have. And it may be an approach of having more groups of people in fewer congregations. At the moment, we have a system where I think the lowest centre would be 60 or 70 people. Okay. And as I say, that's problematic in our experience and from working with organisations
And do you think, like, is it your submission that we should try to get private providers out of this sphere, or do you think there's a place for them somewhere in it?
I don't necessarily think that private providers are problematic, but the last 20 to 20 years suggests that they are. And the problem with private providers is that they would be, unlike non-profit bodies, they would be guided probably by profit.
Okay.
If you look at non-profit bodies, they're guided by a mission statement, by memorandums and articles, by a board, by expertise, by a desire to help people.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you, Deputy O'Callaghan. And before I bring in the next speaker, I just want to indicate to members we only have a couple of more indications. I'd like that we would have a group photograph at the conclusion, and which we will have in our report. And we will invite you all back for the launch of that report, which will be sometime in the autumn. But it's just to flag up to my colleagues in case there's other business that might take them away. Deputy Donegal O'Leary, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming in and for your contributions. It's very, very helpful, and I think it's vitally important, in particular, that we hear from organisations who are working with asylum seekers and refugees, but also from people who have direct experience of the direct provision system. I suppose people who come here seeking asylum, they do so under international protection. And sometimes I think this can be lost in the debate. They are here because they are fleeing persecution, conflict and oppression. And I presume that applies to all of you. So I just think, for the record, and I'm not going to put anyone on the spot because I appreciate it could be obviously traumatic, but is there anyone here who wants to share their reason for seeking asylum? Or if not, if there is any story that you want to tell, just to give, of perhaps a friend or somebody that you know from direct provision, to give this committee an insight into the situations that people flee and the reason that they're here in Ireland seeking international protection.
Yes, please.
I applied for asylum in 2017. I'm from Cape Town in South Africa. And a lot of people, when they hear that, they go, South Africa? But there's no war in South Africa. They expect a person who would be seeking asylum would be coming from a war-torn country. That's the general misconception, whereas international law tells us that you need to have a well-founded fear of persecution, and that persecution may be for reason of your politics or religion or race or membership of a particular social group. I'm a queer man, I'm a gay man. It becomes very difficult to live as an openly gay man in South Africa, particularly if you happen to be from a very poor background or in townships. Rich people do experience the same persecution, but black people in townships experience it much more because we see more deaths, targeted killings of queer people. I've had stones thrown at me, I've been spat on, I've been called all sorts of names. I was at one point held in a shopping center and humiliated by security staff, picked me up and made fun of me, of the way I dressed. I used to be very effeminate. Apparently I'm manly now. But you go through all that trauma of having stones thrown at you just because of your sexual orientation. When I went to South Africa in 2017, in January, I learned that a lesbian woman who had lived down the road from where I lived, she was the third openly gay person in our street. The other one was another man who lived in the street. She was abducted and shot dead for no other reason other than her sexual orientation. And at that point, I decided that was it. I'm not going to wait and hang around to be the next one to be killed. I arrived, when I got to Ireland, I was placed immediately in Balsaskin, like everybody else who seeks asylum. We stayed in Balsaskin for about 5 weeks. The very first week frightened me because for the first time in my life, I was not allowed to work. I've worked since I was 10. Like, I used to help my grandmother sell fruit in the taxi rank back home, and now I'm told that I cannot work. So what do? Eat, sleep, wake up, shower, eat, sleep every single day. It becomes, days become weeks, weeks become months, months become years. So it's very disheartening. You begin to lose hope that the place that you sought sanctuary in is actually not that very kind or compassionate place that you thought it was. I was moved then from Balsaskin to Ó Caoláin. There I was placed in a room with a homophobic man. When he heard that I'm gay, he said, "I don't like that shit," and I'm sorry for my language, but that's how he said it. We had to share a bedroom. We still had to share a bedroom and live together. I think in the first few weeks that I arrived in Ó Caoláin, I was queuing in a canteen when I heard homophobic slurs from other asylum seekers from my same region. The same homophobic slurs that I would have heard in South Africa that raised a lot of anxiety that I might be killed, because a lot of people often who murdered because of their sexual orientation first hear those slurs before they are attacked. So when I told the International Protection Office what was happening in Ó Caoláin, they couldn't be bothered to do anything about it. And then you begin to lose a sense of hope. I didn't trust anybody. I still don't trust anybody in Ó Caoláin. If I go into the canteen, we have to go and queue for food in the canteen. I would often sit on my own with my back against the wall. I can't sit. I wouldn't be sitting there with somebody behind me because I just don't feel comfortable being in that very space. But I have no choice because I have to go and queue there and get food in the canteen. It becomes very difficult to go through life when you live in a situation like that, because you don't really, like, I don't control when I'll be out of there. I've had my first interview only this year. So after a year, I had my interview to assess my asylum claim. For the rest of the time, I was sitting there and my file was gathering dust in the International Protection Office. Then I was called for an interview in March, and I'm still waiting for a recommendation. And I'm told that if the recommendation is positive, I might even wait longer for a declaration from the minister to actually so that I can actually get out of there and live independently. So it becomes very difficult. And then you have very petty bureaucratic processes that you're subjected to in direct provision. Recently, they put up a notice that we're required to have an ID card, to produce an ID card if we need to get our post. For over a year, I've been in Ó Caoláin, and I've been getting my post without producing an ID card. No asylum seeker in this country is issued with an ID card. No asylum seeker, no Irish person has an ID card. You don't have a national ID. But I'm being asked to produce an ID card. They use the immigration permission to stay in Ireland as an ID card. That card is for the purpose of showing a police officer or an immigration officer that I have permission to stay in Ireland. But every single day that I need an ironing board, or that I need to check my post, or tissue, or very petty things that everyday things that you use in your house when you're living through your life, we have to produce all kinds of things. It becomes very disheartening. One of the issues then would be privacy, because if you don't have much privacy, you're forced to share a bedroom with a stranger who may happen to be homophobic, and if you are gay and you're seeking asylum because you're persecuted on the basis of your sexual orientation, to be subjected to the same kind of treatment is cruel from the state side. And then you have staff members in direct provision centers who also undermine the right to privacy for individuals. I was sitting in my room one day, and they knocked once and they opened the door. One lady, it's a lady who worked in Ó Caoláin. She knocked once, she opened the door, and I was sitting in my room getting ready to go and have a shower. So obviously I had my underwear on. The next time it happened, it was a manager in Ó Caoláin direct provision center who walked into the men's showers in the men's block. There's a block specifically for single men, there are several of them. She opened the door in the men's showers, she looked, and then she closed the door and said sorry as she walked away. It's a men's shower, what are you expecting to see there? Like, privacy means nothing to them. We've had similar incidences in Hedgehole Direct Provision Center, in Balsaskin Direct Provision Center, where either a staff member walks into a room and the person is naked, or another resident walks into a room and another person is naked. So we've had experiences from children who feel unsafe in the way that men look at them creepy. It's been reported in the news. In Direct Provision Centers, we have women who feel unsafe sharing those intimate living spaces with other people, because a lot of the women who would have, some of them would have suffered torture or sexual violence, and to be placed then in a position where you feel unsafe again becomes very cruel, because you're not really responding to the person's call. When a person comes and declares that they're seeking protection, that's what they need, protection. To place them in a position where they feel unsafe is very cruel on the part of the government. So we've had those experiences and many other lived experiences of people who lived in direct provision. I'm not the only gay person who has experienced homophobia in direct provision. There are many others, and it's right across the board. And you've had one woman locked herself in Ó Caoláin gym because she felt unsafe sharing the gym with men. And so now they've gone to say, well, we'll reserve certain hours for women only in the gym. But the problem is that she's still going to have to share other intimate spaces with everybody else. And so that minor tweak doesn't really change much in the situation when it comes to personal safety, especially for people who have traumatic experiences. I think I'll pause there. I talk a lot.
Thank you, Bulelani. But before I go back to Deputy O'Leary, would anybody else like to offer of their experience? There are very, very many different stories behind all of your being here. Tina.
Yeah, I will just say, to correct you there, it's not like it's a story. Like when I hear the word story, it's like it's a tale which is just being told. It's serious cases. We have been through, I'll just talk like in a neutral manner. I will not specifically tell about my case. The reason of other women fleeing Zimbabwe is child marriages, of which it's an issue which is still active, like as I'm speaking now. You can check under the BBC interviews where young girls are being interviewed about why you had a child when you are 13, when you are 14, because of such incidents. And you come here, you tell your case, and the officers will tell you that, no, you are lying. How can you say I'm lying, whereas you were not there when the incident was happening? And I'm telling the case because it happened to me. I'm seeking protection, and you are telling me that I'm lying. Like, personally, I don't. It upsets me, because I have been trying to prove it to you for the past 3.5 years that I've been through this issue. And at the end of the day, you're telling me, no, you can go back home, then you cannot live in this certain part of your country is okay. It's better for you to live. You cannot live in this other country. So.
Well, thank you for that.
That's my
all right.
perspective.
Well, yes, very briefly, Bulelani, please.
One of the issues that I didn't speak about is also the exploitation of people who live in direct provision centres. It comes in the form of sexual exploitation. It also comes in terms of work. When people aren't allowed to work legally, it creates then that openness for whoever wants to exploit them to actually do. And we've had people coming to Mercy who have work from 7 a.m. in the morning till 5 o'clock, and they are only paid 25 to 27 euros. It becomes very difficult then for a person to live a normal life, because they don't have a sense of what their rights are. Once they are actually given permission to live, they might just continue with that exploitation. We also have people being offered money for sex in direct provision, because people know that there are people who are getting paid 21.60 per week. It's now 38.80, and you have to live. I've been offered money for sex. There are children who've been offered money for sex. There are women who've been offered money for sex. So it becomes very, the exploitation, we don't know to what extent that it is happening, but we have had reports from our work and from other people. The producer of a show called Taken Down, they were doing research before that show. It's set in a direct provision center, and one of the things they come across too was that people were being offered money for sex. So people know where the direct provision centers are. People know that there are people there who are very vulnerable, and then you have all sex pets coming around and trying to exploit people, and that needs to be highlighted as well.
All right, thank you. Deputy O'Leary, please.
Just to thank Bulelani and Tina, thank you very much, and I'm very grateful for you for sharing that the reasons that you sought asylum, because I do think it's important, because sometimes the debate around this issue neglects the fact that people have come here after fleeing persecution, oppression, violence, and it can be forgotten that people have suffered traumas that most of us here can only begin to imagine, and yet the system is re-traumatising people again and putting people through what I believe to be a very traumatic system. And I agree with Nick, and I agree with yourselves that it is a system that is failing people's human rights and needs to be replaced. I want to put the question to Massey, and I want to put it to yourselves, Nick, as well. Last week, Justice Brian McMahon said to us that in his view, while it was far from perfect, that the direct provision system had improved. I want to get your response to that. I also want to ask you, for your experience, what is your experience of the Garda National GNIB? What's this?
Immigration Bureau?
Yeah, Garda National Immigration Bureau, and of the Gardaí generally, and how that office conducts itself. So I'll put that question to both groups, and then I'll have a final set of questions, Chair.
Would you like to lead off, Nick? Would you please?
Yeah, as I said in our opening address, we have a real concern that the system has worsened, and the primary manifestation of that is emergency centres.
Yeah.
There is around 500 plus people in emergency centres, and these are hotels or bed and breakfasts that the state has procured, has contracted with to provide accommodation on an emergency basis. We've used the phrase off-grid. We don't really know where they are located, those centres are located, and fundamentally the people in those centres or in those hotels or bed and breakfasts don't know where external services that could help them are located. There's also been issues of those people not going through Belseskin Reception Centre, where that person, if that were to be the case, you should be receiving a medical card. So people haven't been getting medical cards. They've been located in areas where, for example, the GP list may be full. There is a significant number of children, I think something like 88 children in emergency centres, and like children in homeless B&B accommodation, they've struggled to get education, and I don't know if they've had any education at all. So we're gravely concerned at that situation. Secondly, in terms of wider improvements, as we understand it, over the last 2 years, there's been a narrowing between the actual capacity within direct provision and the occupancy rates. So there's become fewer and fewer beds, to the point where it's now simply overcrowded, and that has meant that any reforms that would have been envisaged by the government via the McMahon process have had to be curtailed or limited to an extent. Thirdly, we'd refer you to NASC, which is an NGO in Cork, who I think the committee will be hearing from in June. They've done an important report that has analysed the extent to which those recommendations have been implemented, and the picture was less clear than maybe has been suggested by the government. But the emergency centres is of a real concern, and we don't see that necessarily changing over 2019, just by numbers and also existing capacity within the traditional direct provision estate being full.
Thank you for that. Yes, Rosemary.
If I could just add to that, I would say the reception conditions regulations, we opted into them last year, and under those regulations, there are a set of requirements that the state should follow. So, for example, Regulation 3 requires that you're given information when you first arrive about what your rights are, what your entitlements are, and organisations that might be able to help you. That's simply not happening in our experience. So we have people who are arriving in, particularly from these emergency centres, who don't know where they should be going, who don't know how to apply for an asylum application, who don't know how to get legal aid, who don't know how to apply for a PPS number, a GP card, even basic access to medicine and to as Lucky mentioned, prescriptions. So people are arriving, and it's quite simply firefighting at the moment, which means that the benefit of any reforms which might have been in place or underway following the McMahon report just aren't following through in practice. So in our experience, there is a firefighting exercise undergoing at the moment in the Department of Justice, and what we need to see is, alongside that, a commitment to a medium to long-term reform of the system overall, because the conditions at the moment are just unacceptable.
Thank you. Lucky, is that right? Yes.
Lucky, yeah.
Please.
Thank you, Deputy, for those questions. And nice to see you here. We've been, many years when we were in Cork. You were always there, making yourself known in the Direct Provision Centre there. Everyone there knows your work there, which is something that we appreciated in Cork there. I remember you arranged for a bus stop on the opposite side there for the lines to be drawn, which was danger to the children. Great. In terms of improvements, I hear you saying that there was a comment of the situation has improved. I will say that as Marcy, as on day-to-day interaction with the people, things have gone worse. I must say that and repeat it, things have gone worse. The situation that the government finds itself in terms of having to provide the emergency accommodation shouldn't have happened. We should have had a better plan to be able to respond to the high rise of the people that will be coming here. The immigration crisis has been there since 2015. So which means if we are thinking now about what to do now, we didn't think hard enough before. One of the things that was through the working group came the single application procedure and the introduction of the International Protection Act. All right? That, we were told, was going to cut everything to 9 months. Right? We were told the system will be able to have gone through everything within 9 months. So that meant that you have 9 months to be out of there. Right? That didn't happen. There's a backlog of over 18 months of the people who have not been called for the first instance interview. So there are people who have not received a chance to go and present their refugee case, and some don't even know when they will be called. That is a problem. The actual indication of how things bad are, there are 2 centers I can just quote that took some action. In West Cork, 2 months ago, where the residents had it and they demonstrated. In Moseley, there was a demonstration. That indicates that there is something wrong that is happening. And what is also alarming is the squeezing of the residents by the local management in terms of discouraging people from speaking up or laying complaints. I know there are complaints that have been recorded by the Ombudsman, but the numbers are low as well as far as that is concerned. It's because people are told, right, that if they complain, their cases will be affected, their application will be affected. So there is fear. There is fear that is capturing people in order to be able to say this is what is not happening. In one of the centers, I don't know whether the management have got so much power that they can just issue a notice that will just disrupt everybody. One of the centers, I'll make 2 examples. One of the centers issued a notice to say that people are not allowed to use their phones, laptops, iPads during a certain time. They impose a curfew for no reason. for people not to be able to communicate with all. Some people are studying, they use their time to study. Some people have got families everywhere in different time zones. So in your mind, how you would just wake up and impose a rule like that? In one of the centers as well, people, residents do have their, what we call counter fridges. Sometimes people donate a fridge, like if a person has got a kid, they have to store medication or whatever, so that people can just be able to take something from their fridge in their room. And one of the centers just made a rule that it's no longer allowed to have a fridge in your room, and actually went and confiscated those fridges and took them away from the people's rooms, especially when they were not there. So the way that people will just come into your room and just ransack your room and leave everything. You know, when you're, from a lady's point of view, for instance, you come in your place, your whole wardrobe is just tiered upside down, just because people were just looking for whatever they're looking for. So that is the kind of life that people are living currently in direct provision. And that fear, to me, is a big problem, because things will explode. When you treat people like that, there comes a time when people say enough is enough. And we can avoid such things by just being compassionate enough when you deal with people as human beings. That's all that we request, even from the people that are there. Because, I mean, the hotel managers, they've got no knowledge whatsoever to treat people that suffer torture. They're only interested in their bottom line. Some even get to an extent of taking the residents themselves to volunteer in the center because of downsizing. Why? They're maximizing profits. They don't replace people that would have been salaried, and take the people that are vulnerable, can agree to everything, and use them to provide service and work that is supposed to be provided by the state. That needs to stop, and that needs to be highlighted so that people can account on those things. You spoke about GNIB and GADA. Well, the experience that we have with GNIB is the length of time now that it takes for people to get their GNIB cards. Because remember, GNIB, when you have been granted your right to stay here, whether refugee or subsidiary or leave to remain, the key is for you to get that GNIB. Without that GNIB card, you don't have anywhere to go. So the delays is a problem in our interactions with the GNIB. That's the problem. With the GADA, we don't really have much contact with the GADA, unless when they are called, when somebody complained or whatever against you in the center. But we don't really have that much contact with them.
Okay. Before going back to you, Deputy, I'd just like to offer the opportunity to Rosemary, Christopher and Babs at any time that you would like to. There aren't two tiers here, it's just that we couldn't put you all sitting together. You're all equally welcome, and if you would like to indicate at any time you'd like to offer your perspective, any points you'd like to make. Rosemary, you're indicating.
Yeah, I will just talk about the process of the interview. As it was recommended, there should be a single application process, and I'm not too sure how it's really, if it's applied, because I had to apply again for the single process in 2016, and then I got a refusal, and then I had to appeal that, and then I got a refusal, then I had to go to the High Court, and the High Court, they're like, oh, they said my case should be heard again. And I went for my interview sometime 2 months ago. I'm still waiting, but the experience that I got there, it was really dehumanizing, because they stopped looking at why I came here to seek asylum. They went into my personal life, and when I explained something, they were telling me, you're lying. And I felt like, really, this is just dehumanizing. And the other thing I would say is the tribunal members, they should be more knowledgeable what's happening if I'm going to seek, if I'm going for an interview. They should be more knowledgeable of what's going on in my country. They kept on pressurizing me that you are a refugee in Swaziland because you have a travel document. And that's how it is in my country. We have travel document that we use in the southern part of Africa. So really, I feel like there's more to be done with the tribunal members. And also, it's really mental torture for one to keep on repeating themselves of what they've gone through. Like currently, when someone asks me to say, why are you in the country? I don't speak anymore because I'm tired of crying. I can't keep on saying, okay, this is what happened to me. For how long would I be saying that? I need to move on. So really, it's dehumanizing to make someone sit there. This is not a story. This is not a love story. It's something that we're going through. As a mother, you go and tell them that, okay, this is what my children are going through. You're lying. How can you lie that your children are suffering? Thank you.
Thank you, Rosemary. Would you like to take an opportunity now, Christopher? Please.
Yes, please. I promise I won't take long. I will specifically touch on a lot of issues that have been touched on, especially single mothers and children in direct provision. Up until today, after the Ombudsman for Children had actually said it is not fit for human habitation, let alone growing up children in those environments, I don't understand how mothers with children are still in direct provision. I personally, at this stage, don't believe that the Department of Justice or the International Protection Office does consider asylum seeker mothers and children as human beings. The creepy look on the children by men in those small passages, which actually serves as playing grounds for the children, and these naked men that will be walking on those passages to the bathrooms, bring it into sense. Let's just bring it into a normal human being's situation. Me, old as I am, I'm a father. My youngest is 21 years old. I have to walk in that passage with my towel tied around my waist to go into a bathroom, and there are children playing there, 3-year-olds to 16-year-olds, boys and girls, because there are no playgrounds. It's just not worth it. It's just not fit for any purpose. When we request and we say that direct provision should be abolished, it is not in an environment for human beings to live. I can invite any one of you deputies here to come and spend a night with me in direct provision. In Viking House, where I sleep with 3 other people in the same room. I've literally measured it. It's actually 4 meters by another 4 meters. And it's 4 of us in this room. We've got our wardrobes in there. We've got, within that area I'm talking about, we've got our bathroom in there. And the 4 of us, and we're all men. In that same environment, that same center, Viking House, there is no area where if you come today and visit me, where you can sit and talk to me, just greet me. There is none. And that is not human living. And the jailer, prisoner attitude that prevails there is not for human beings. When I go to sleep in Viking House tonight, I tell my system that I am going home. But is it really home? Where when I get there, whoever that wants to see me has to sign that has come to see me. If he is lucky, will be given the opportunity to get someone to go and call me to come and stand with him outside. Like I said, there is no sitting space. There is no what would they call those spaces where you would sit and, talk to someone? There is none. And the treatment by the center management, I don't know what is in place by RIA, or Reception Integration, that has been put in place for training of the people that work there, because they do have the feeling that they are jailers there and that we are prisoners and that they are doing favors for us. From the kitchen staff, you get people being thrown with plates of food. Sometimes those plates will fall and people will laugh. That happens to human beings, adults, who will be in a queue, by the way. And you will then beg for food. If you happen to miss a meal, you miss a meal, you know you've missed a meal. You can come back, the same food that has not been served, because I missed my meal, obviously, there will be leftovers, cannot be served to me because I'm out of meal time. That is not human. I don't honestly have to wake up at 8 o'clock to make sure that I have breakfast before 9 o'clock. Otherwise, if I get there at 2 minutes past 9, the door is closed. And that place I call home. And I've been there for the past 3 years. I still can't get a meal. I attend school in Dublin because I understand about the accommodation situation. There is a problem with accommodation, but I live in Waterford. To come to UCD and back, that is 6 hours on the road every day. I'm a full-time student. I cannot get packed lunch from the center. It is in the 38 euros that I get, that I have to pay for my traveling, that I have to get my food, that I have to get to school. And it is just well and good with the Reception Integration Agency. It is well and good with the IPO. And I don't really believe this is natural. I don't really believe a country of islands status should be doing this to people. I don't believe it should be done. And we've spoken about improvement. The Judge McMahon a week ago was like, it's improving. I want to disagree. I disagree, fully disagree, I am there. I wonder how he terms improvement when in a situation where we are talking about the people, the management, the people that run direct provision of being for profit, and when they're actually made even to be more richer, and we still call that improvement. In the centers where they have moved from slightly to providing cooking facilities, they've also set up shops. And those shops are still owned by these people. Why the segregation? You set up a shop, you say, okay, I must stop queuing for food, but now you must cook. But then you must cook in my kitchen. But then you must buy in my shop here. There is little out the gate. There is central at the gate. I could buy what I want there, but I'm given a voucher to go there. And not only that, we are also told to come and report what you would want to buy. Tell us in advance what you would want to buy next week when you bring your voucher here, so that we may order what you need. That is not on. That is not life. When it comes to education and work permits, I still feel instead of the right to work giving people better opportunities, it has actually given people, put people in the negative. Because right now, if you want to do school, or you want to get trained, or want to do anything, it is a requirement that you must have a work permit. Which means now the department that's responsible, Social Protection Department, will not approve any training if you don't have a work permit. And unfortunately, the people that don't have work permits are a majority, and they are the people that have been in the system long, which means they've now been deprived of the opportunity to even study. And also, I'm doing third level. But when you're in direct provision, you are not supposed to be studying above level 4. In Monaghan, Institute Monaghan will not take you for training, even if you are prepared to pay international fees. They will not take you for training into any course that is above level 4. I don't see that as improvement. I see it as getting worse. The weight again by people that have received their refugee status. We have 2 gentlemen in Tramo that have waited 8 months for the letter from the minister. They've been awarded, they've been given the notice that they've been given refugee status, but they're waiting 8 months, they're in direct provision, waiting 8 months for the letter itself that will facilitate his going to GNIB and get a GNIB card, let alone moving out of direct provision. You've been told it's approved, you are a refugee, it's been approved, but you still can't get a letter for 8 months. It's actually really not, it's not on. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher. Christopher, no, I'm going to have to go back to the deputy, but I will allow you to come in. Christopher, just a light moment. I knew the minute you said you'd be brief that you'd be like all my colleagues here. You're definitely part of all of this. Rosemary, just yourself, and I'm going back to the colleagues now.
Yeah, I'll be just brief. On the, I will be, trust me. Yeah, on the issue of the improvement on the right to cook, in my centre they've introduced a food hall. And often when I go there, mostly I just get water and fruits, because the food that is there, I cannot eat it. And I'm just suggesting, is it possible that people would be getting vouchers to go into the shops themselves to get what they want? Like, they're buying the food in SuperVal. If you give me the voucher, I have a wider selection of what I want. Because although they say you have to write what you want, I'm a difficult person, so whatever I write there, they don't bring it. I understand, because maybe not too many people would buy. So that's just a suggestion that I'm putting to say, can we just get vouchers that we can go and use them? And also, the vouchers, people who are living, like who are spending all their time in the direct provision, they're not sufficient for the whole week. You're given 45 points to use for 7 days. And like if you want to get a meal, it's about 4 points. Like if you're getting your lunch, 4 points. So if you're using 10 points a day, that's already 70 points per week. But you're getting 45 points. We're not including toiletries. You still have to get toiletries by yourself and all that. So I really don't know how the points are working, because a lot of parents, they've come to me to say, the points that we're getting, they're not taking us up to the whole week. Children are living on bread. So really, when we talk of improvement, I don't know. It hasn't really happened. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosemary. I'm going back now to the deputy, and I think it was worthwhile hearing the other testimony. Please.
Absolutely, and I suppose thank you all very much. It's been really, really helpful, and I think very thought-provoking. I actually probably had a number of other questions, but I let them be now, because I think some of your observations have answered those. But look, just briefly, just to say, I agree. Direct provision is not fit for purpose. It's not fit for. It's not a fit place to raise children. It's not a fit place for anyone to live. And I know that there's been discussion previously about comparisons with institutions of the past, and some people have debated that, but I'll say this, as far as I'm concerned, it is an institutionalisation. It's a form of warehousing people, and it reflects very poorly on Ireland as a country, and it does very much need to be replaced. And to be honest, unfortunately, it's come through in what you said here today, it far too often is adversarial in a way that I'm not sure it necessarily needs to be at all. So look, I'll actually leave it at that. Yeah, I will leave it at that. I have no further questions. But thank you all from Massey and from the Refugee Council, and I hope that we can produce a report at the end of this that does justice to these hearings.
Thank you, Deputy O'Leary. Senator Frances Black.
Thank you so much for your presentations today. My head is spinning, to be honest with you. I am blown away by the reality of the situation. I knew it was bad, but I wasn't aware of how horrendous it is. And I just want to repeat something that you said, Biolani, around, it was the end of your presentation, and I think it's very important that I repeat it, and I hope that's okay. We are human beings like you. All we ask is that we be treated as such. The very fact that people have to ask their government to treat them humanely should shame all of you. And I, for one, feel absolutely devastated at what I've heard today. I'm so ashamed that I live in this country. I'm so ashamed by the way our government is treating you. There is no representation here today from our government. Obviously, it's probably too hard for them to hear what the reality is. We don't know. I'm so grateful that you're here today, because we need to hear the reality of what it's like to live in direct provision. And I'm shaken with anger, but I'm also really saddened to hear that there are people going through what you're going through in this day and age. And we talk about the Magdalene laundries, we talk about it and we say, oh, people look back and go, oh my God, that's terrible, how did that happen? It's going on here today.
20 years.
It's going on here today. That's the reality. I told a man who I was speaking to last week, and he was saying, he was from the US, and he was saying, thank God the Magdalene laundries and the abuse that happened years ago. And I said, it's actually going on. And I'll give you a story. I said, I heard a situation where a woman who was 9 months pregnant lived in direct provision centre in the Midlands, and she went into labour. She had no money to get a taxi, and she had to walk to the hospital in labour. That's what's going on in our country today. And he actually cried. He actually burst into tears. So, I mean, what is going on? What the hell is going on? We don't treat animals like, in this country, we don't treat animals the way you're getting treated, and the way the people in direct provision are getting treated. I've so many notes here that I've taken down, and there's just a couple of points, Caoimhghín, if that's all right with you, that I want to touch on. There was a story told here last week, and I think it's around the right to work, and this really impacted me also, where there was a man in direct provision with his wife and 3 children, and he was asked by one of the people who presented here last week about his legal status and how he was getting on with his legal status. And he said, I don't care about the legal status, he said, at this time. All I want to do is work. All I want to do is get up in the morning, go out to work, come back, tell my children that I went to work today, and I don't even want to get paid for it. Just give me my dignity. So that's why we have to, and I know Jack and Jim touched on it today, we really do need to see an actually effective right to work. It's absolutely vital. Look, I don't believe, we need to get rid of direct provision. There's no doubt about it. This report is so important, and that would be my recommendation. Get rid of direct provision, treat people with respect and dignity. I can't even imagine what it's like for those children who are people coming from trauma. And I know I work in an area of trauma in a different field, but I know what trauma does to people. I see the impact. And to come from a trauma situation where people are being tortured and sexually violated and sexually abused, to come here and be treated with such disrespect, with no dignity, the humanity, I don't know where our humanity has gone to. Anyway, I'm sorry, I need to be able to say this because it's so upsetting what I'm hearing today. And even though I was aware of how bad it was, I didn't realise that it was as bad. I mean, the fact that you have to give a card for an ironing board, this private companies, the operating centres, this piece really frustrates me. I mean, last year we paid over 70 million to private firms operating direct provision centres. And yet you have to go and buy the food where you want to cook your own food, which is a basic human right. And then you have to go to a shop to buy food from that shop. I mean, the integration piece, I would like to hear your thoughts on it. So I'm sorry I'm just really upset to hear everything, but I would like to hear your thoughts on efforts at helping asylum seekers integrate in Irish society. So there's a few things, and I just wanted to write, I hope this is okay. The first is, although we have an official government migrant integration strategy, asylum seekers are excluded from it. So they're simply not mentioned. This suggests, while the state will actively try to help integrate migrant EU workers, for example, this isn't the case with asylum seekers. Would I be right in saying that? Yeah. Okay. And secondly, reading about the design of the direct provision system, it seems that there's almost a fear of real, genuine integration running through the heart of the rules. The logic seems to be that if we let people put down roots to work and embed into the community, it would be harder if their application is ultimately refused. So many in the centres live at a physical and social distance from local communities. So can you speak a little bit about those experiences, and can we hear a little bit about those experiences? And I also want to hear a little bit about your experiences around the right to work. Because I do think that's really important. And a little bit more around cooking facilities, a basic human right, as to how important it is to have basic cooking facilities. You know, and a lot of the direct provision centres still don't have those facilities. So that's firstly, anyway. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Who would like to? Yes, Bululani.
Now, Caoimhghín is a mixed accommodation centre. We have several families living there, and we have a lot of single men. There are, I think, 4 out of the 6 blocks are occupied by single men, and then you have single ladies as well. And a lot of the single ladies have find it very difficult to share communal spaces with men, and so when you have to go and queue in the canteen with children, even their kids, I mean, she has kids in Caoimhghín. We queue with her kids sometimes to go and get food. Like you see children going in. One day, one child went in to ask for a donut. And it's like, well, we've given you one already. The child wanted another donut. It's just a donut. And sometimes people don't even take those donuts and they serve them the following day. But they didn't give it to them. Like, it's a child. It becomes very difficult then for parents. I'm sure Donna will speak. She's a parent. I'm sure she'll speak about the difficulties of parenting in direct provision. But from integration point of view, the reception and integration agency forgets what integration means in their name. I don't think they even know that the word is in their name, because all they do is just receive people. They take the forms. What they give you when you arrive in a direct provision center is the house rules that you'll get. They'll tell you when your meal times are. 8 o'clock, you'll be, whatever time it is, it varies from direct provision centres. You'll be told in the morning you'll have your breakfast, and you'll have in the afternoon, you'll have your lunch, and in the evening you'll have what time you'll have your dinner. And in most of the centres where there are no cooking facilities, well, you are also told what to eat and when to eat it. You don't get to decide what to eat. Well, the strangest thing for many people is that you go into the center and you see people eating, they're enjoying the food, and then you find one person sitting there. It's like, one of my friends are sitting, so how on earth are they enjoying this? This is terrible, because tastes vary. We don't all like the same thing. We don't all like the same spices. So when you walk into a canteen and you smell the same spices, it kind of smells the same every day. The canteen has a unique, it's a canteen like. If you go into a hospital canteen or a prison canteen, it will have its own smell. And when you live in a direct provision center, you recognize that every single day. And so when I live here, I'm going to go back to Ó Caoláin, and the moment I see the sign Ó Caoláin, I'll be dreading it because I know the experience of having to live through in the morning, waking up, shower, going to eat, and have no sense of purpose. Meaning in life is lost when you're not allowed to work, because you see people coming in to do their work. Irish people who work in direct provision centres, they go in and they report for duty every morning, and you're reminded every day that you're not allowed to work. They are living life, so you get to sit and watch people live their lives. And it's even worse in centres that are actually in the city centres, because people who live in the city centre in Limerick, in a direct provision centre there, have to watch people go about their day-to-day lives. And they are reminded every day that they are not allowed to go and do other things that people do, ordinary things that people do every day. So it becomes very difficult to talk about integration when you are warehoused in a direct provision centre like Ó Caoláin, where you don't have access to public transport, so you can't really go anywhere, where you're given €38 a week without public transport, and they are told, well, how are you going to socialize? What kind of social life are you going to live? We are social beings as human beings. If you have a dog, if any of the TDs or senators in the House have a dog, you'll know that you need to take your dog out for walks and things like that. If you only kept a dog in one room and you said you gave this dog shelter and you gave it food, that dog wouldn't be satisfied with life. In fact, it would be cruel not to take the dog out for a walk and to let the dog do what dogs do. But we allow that to happen to people in the asylum system, to take all the things that make us human away. All the things that human beings do away, like you can't work. Since the beginning of time, if you study history, you'll know the history of mankind, you'll know that human beings have always worked to provide for themselves, for their loved ones, and to improve the human experience on earth. But here you take a person, because they've applied for asylum, and you say, you're not allowed to work. Then it becomes difficult for them to actually integrate into the community while they are in direct provision. You can't speak to me about integration while I'm still segregated. I'm using a segregated bus. Like when we get off the bus in Limerick city centre, you see all these brown people. You actually see Irish people staring at us and going, where did that bus come from? It has brown people. They don't look like you. They look different. It only has them. Everybody knows it's from a direct provision centre. When the bus shows up in a school, some of the school kids are ashamed for their friends to know where they live. But everybody knows that that school bus is going to take them to a direct provision centre. When we go on every Thursday, we have to go get a check from social welfare to go and claim the €38 per week allowance. We go and queue in the post office. When we produce that PBS card and we produce that check, everybody in the queue, everybody in the post office staff know that person lives in a direct provision centre. It's written on the check receipt itself that it's a direct provision allowance. So you're constantly reminded of how bad your life is, and you're constantly reminded that you are not considered part of Irish society. You're divorced from social life. You can't really socialize on 38.80 while you're living in Mount Trenchard. There is no public transport. There is no public transport in Ó Caoláin and other direct provision centres as well. I had to get to a hospital. I had a medical appointment. I wanted to go to see a doctor, and the appointment was at 9 o'clock. I went to the community social welfare officer who works in Ó Caoláin, and I said, well, I have to get to the hospital. Would you be able to pay the supplementary allowance so that I can actually travel, because it's outside of the normal. But the bus in Ó Caoláin leaves at 10. There are 3 buses. One is at 10, one is at 1 o'clock, and then the last one, if you miss it, you have to walk for about over an hour or so. It's at 5 o'clock. That's the last one. So I needed to get to the hospital at 9 o'clock, and she was like, we don't cover regional travel. The regional hospital is about 9 kilometers away from Ó Caoláin Centre. I checked on Google when I was sitting there. I was like, how am I going to get there? I had to sit there and argue with her over why I need assistance to get to the hospital. Like, I need to go to the hospital and see a doctor. Like, she's like, no, we don't cover regional travel. It's dehumanizing for a person to have to explain something very basic. very basic need, medical assistance, you need to get to a hospital. Now I have to actually, it's almost as if they want us to get on our knees and beg for these things. If I wasn't in a direct provision center, I would have provided for my own medical expenses. The Department of Justice knows this. Where I come from, I worked, I was studying, I was able to provide for various very basic things. But now we have to go and argue with people. We have to argue with bureaucrats. We have to argue with managers in the center over very basic things, that everyday things that people go through. So it became difficult for me to even sit there and stand there and look at her, say, well, I have to get to a hospital. In the end, she said, well, we'll call a taxi. And I was checking the meter on the taxi because she suggested that she stopped herself before suggesting that I should walk there, like 9 kilometers away to get to the hospital. I'll probably have to leave at around 5 or 4 or 6 o'clock. But it's dehumanizing for me to have to go through that process of explaining the need. Because it's self-explanatory. I have to get to the hospital and get whatever I need from the hospital. So when that happened, I felt discouraged. It becomes very difficult to go through the same process again with the welfare officer, because if I have another appointment that I need assistance with, I'll still have to go and see her. So when the reception and integration agency says, oh, we're providing this, they can tick a box and say, well, we've improved this, we've done this, they are entitled to a medical card. I have the medical card, but I cannot put the medical card under my feet and fly to the hospital. Those are very basic things that aren't there for people. So it becomes very difficult to even hear the word integration, even from NGOs. It sickens me when they go in a direct provision center and they're like, we want to help. We want to help integrate people. You're not helping a person being integrated if that person at the end of the day goes back and sleeps in a direct provision center. That alone should tell you that they are segregated from the communities that you live in yourself. Because they don't live amongst you, they live amongst people like them. That's the problem. That's where the fundamental problem is. We don't begin to talk about integration while you still have direct provision. You cannot talk about integrating asylum seekers when a person can be removed from the state at any point. There is no integration there. If you want to integrate a person, you'll integrate them into your social life in the country so that people will be able to socialize. You'll integrate them into the political life. We've seen people running for election. You integrate them in the economical life of the country so that they can actually work and become members, productive members of society and contribute and end the profiteering. In one direct provision center in Cork, before I stop, I talk a lot, they had 3 bunk beds in one tiny room, 6 asylum seekers in that one tiny room. It earns the company €6,300 per month for that one tiny room. If you or I or anybody in Ireland today was looking for a house to rent, they would not pay that much for that room. But we allow it to happen because it's happening to people who aren't from here. It's happening to asylum seekers. They should be grateful they are here. They should be grateful they are given a bed and food. That's what we're told. We get called welfare scroungers, freeloaders. We've had in the election campaign, we've been called freeloaders. We never asked. When an asylum seeker came to Ireland, they never asked the Irish government for a plate of food. Nobody arrives at Dublin Airport and says, I'd like to have food, please. So when you tell me that you're providing me with food, and never ask for any of that, I ask for protection. So it becomes very difficult to even begin to talk about integration for us when we have people being warehoused in direct provision centers without access to very basic everyday things, and they are being treated inhumanely by managers who can just waltz into the room without consideration of their privacy needs, without considering that people have suffered traumatic experiences. You warehousing vulnerable people, children, women who feel unsafe in direct provision centers, sexual violence. We've had reports from Akidwa of the experiences of women in direct provision center feeling unsafe. I think I said it when I was responding to the TD there, that people come already with fear. So when you put them in a direct provision center where they'll experience the same fear, you're not really, that should alone tell you that the system is not fit for purpose. So I'll let somebody else speak.
Donna, would you like to come back in?
I find it very shocking that it has been said that there's been improvements or that there's recommendations that have been implemented, yet people continue to live in a forced state of poverty. I think one of my biggest problems with that whole idea or the working group report that came out is that no one came here, as Bulalani has said, looking for comfort. We're not looking to be comfortable in direct provision. We do not want the direct provision system to be reformed or to be made comfortable. A lot of us came here seeking protection, as he has said. We did not unpack our experiences or our skills and expertise in the countries that we came from. We came here with those. So that means that we are able to work, we're capable, we're qualified to do so, and all we want to be able to do is be allowed to do that so that we can provide for our families. I already mentioned that I'm a mother of 3. Unfortunately, I've been living in this system for 5 years now, and only until yesterday did I get a kind of a decision on my case. It is finally out of the High Court, where I was appealing the decision that was made on my initial refugee status application. So it's still very unclear what's happening there because I do not have any contact with my solicitor. I have not been updated as to what that means, the fact that it was successful in the High Court, which is a major problem that many of us face. We do not have proper legal advice. No one, it's there in principle that we do have legal aid, but you only ever get to see your solicitor probably once on the day before an interview. It's a great challenge to raise a family in direct provision, to raise children in direct provision, on an allowance of what used to be €19.10. I cannot begin to explain to you the challenge of having to save up €19 to meet the expenses that are associated with raising children. My eldest is in her 3rd year of secondary school now. I'll take you back to 2 years when she had to start her 1st year. The initial cost of her starting off in school was approximately €900. I had no idea where that €900 was going to come from because I was on a €19.10 allowance. I had to save up from that €19.10 to supplement the €150 that I was being given by the state as the back-to-school fund that's given to every other person to try and meet that expense, let alone the other expenses of my other 2 children. Now, my biggest problem with that is the limitations that are being imposed on the development of these children. They're not able to participate, for example, in extracurricular activities in school. So ever since my children have come here and have been in the school system, they have never been able to partake or to take part in extracurricular activities. The centers do not provide transport for them to be able to go to these activities, for example. I'm not able to pay for those activities should they wish to take part in them because of that €38.80 allowance that I'm restricted to, because obviously I do not have the right to work. The children in secondary school, an example would be my daughter this year. She's going on to TY next year. She has a school trip that's coming up in January. It's a trip with an option to go either on an exchange program to the United States or to Austria on a ski trip. Now, this is a trip that everyone in her class is going to be going to. She knows that she has a passport because when we came to Ireland, we obviously got here with passports, which we had to obviously give up at our point of arrival when you seek asylum, which is what we did. But how do you as a parent go about explaining to your daughter or to your son that you will not be able to take part in this activity that is going to possibly shape or have a huge impact on the rest of your life, and your peers are going to be taking part in that, but you are not able to? This is one of the restrictions and one of the barriers that we face as a parent. Should I be able to send this child, should some miracle happen that this child is able to go to this trip, it costs €960. I don't have the right to work. How am I supposed to be able to provide or to meet that expense? Now, what I'm highlighting here is the bigger issues, but I want to give you examples of simple things that we face, or simple oppressions, little oppressions that we face in the centres on a daily basis. I had a recent incident where I needed a roll of tissue. So we are given tissue and, well, basic toiletries. We're given toothpaste, tissue, shower gel in our centre in Ó Caoláin. But it happened that on this day, we ran out of tissue in the room. As embarrassing and humiliating as it is that I have to say this to you now, I was in the bathroom when this happened that I realized that there was no tissue. Naturally, I called on my daughter. I said, can you run down to reception? She's 12 years old. Can you go to reception and get a roll of tissue and bring it back here? She went to reception and was mocked by 2 of the security that were on duty and told her to go back and tell her mother to come out of the bathroom and fetch the tissue herself. Because apparently the manager had now said to them they're not allowed to give tissue to children. What is wrong with giving tissue paper to a 12-year-old? I'll take you back to an incident which you might already be aware of. My son was sick at some point and he needed a simple slice of bread and milk. This was at 1 a.m. I'm not allowed to cook for them. I'm not allowed to have food in my room. Previously, I was able to access these things. But on this particular day, the manager had decided that they were going to impose this rule. I went to the reception at 1 a.m. in desperate need of a slice of bread and milk to help this child that was sickly. I was denied that. Now, as a result of what happened, I think the minister requested an inquiry to be made into this, and some sort of apology happened. I don't know whether it was directed to me or who it was directed to, but some kind of apology happened there, and the staff were supposed to receive training. Now, from people that have received training, I don't know whether it was to treat people with more respect or more humanly, we are back to an incident where I'm having to be denied tissue and told to get out of the bathroom and come and fetch it myself. So that raises a big question there. But it also goes back to me thinking in terms of what kind of society or what kind of children is the direct provision system shaping the future societies or the future communities. If you are putting me in that centre on an allowance of €38 per week, you're teaching me how to be dependent on the system. I am teaching my children how to be dependent on the system. I'm teaching them how to be helpless. By the time I move out of that centre and I'm on a social welfare payment of €180 per week, there's no way I'm going to move myself out and go and find work. That is a promotion for me, going from €38.80. But automatically what that's doing is teaching my children the same system of dependency. Now that is very dangerous. That is a very dangerous situation that is being created there. Children are not even allowed to attend a school of their choice in direct provision. They're confined to the schools that are either in the local area or that you're referred to by the manager in the centre. My child goes to a school that's a bit out of where we live. It's about 20 kilometers away, because this is the school that naturally her peers from primary school chose to go to, so that's the school she wanted to go to. The bus that takes her to school is less than 1 kilometer away from the centre. The first bus out of the centre to take children to school is at 8 a.m. My daughter needs to be at the bus stop at 7:45. I have asked the centre management many times to just make an adjustment, and this is not just specifically for her. There's a few other children who need an earlier bus service. But we have continuously been denied that bus service, which means that from that €38 allowance, I have to pay a lady €40 every week to take her to the bus stop and to bring her back in the afternoon to the centre. I don't know how we are expected to survive under those conditions. The same teenage daughter that I'm talking about has no idea how to boil an egg. For the last 5 years that I've lived in direct provision, my children do not know the taste of my cooking. They are subjected to what's served in the canteen. My 9-year-old eats rice and gravy on a daily basis. You can go to the center, Bulelani sees him in the canteen, and I'm sure he's the one that asked for the donut and was refused the second one. But that's the one thing that he'll go in there and he'll find that he likes. Otherwise, he's on a diet of rice and gravy, endlessly, because that's the only thing that he can stand to eat. That is not a normal situation. That is not a way that any child should be growing up. I do not think it would be acceptable for us, or it would be acceptable to the community or to the Irish society to take an Irish child and put them in that situation or subject them to live and grow up in those kind of conditions. Direct provision is not fit for purpose. It's been said over and over again. We're not looking for comfort, like I've said. We're just looking to live as normal human beings, to be able to contribute to the communities that have welcomed us in many situations, but also for the opportunity to give our children a better life from what they have experienced or from what we have experienced from the countries of origin. We just want that opportunity to have that sanctuary, to have that safety, and be able to live normal lives.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you. Tina, no, time is going to beat me, but if you wanted to add just a small point, just in follow-on, because I need to go back to the Senator and other colleagues to ask questions.
I just want to add just a few points there. In terms of the food halls, I think there is a perspective that, especially in Mosney, I live in Mosney, and most people have that thing of like, it's the best direct provision center in the country. Of course, some people can say yes, it is, because everyone in there cooks for themselves. There are playgrounds for kids. So whenever they are talking about direct provision, they only concentrate on Mosney only. Yet there is Monaghan, where the playgrounds for kids have been closed, where there is in Cork and Kinsale, they're not allowed to cook. We're talking of those kind of centers, not only advertising Mosney as a good place in the whole system.
I accept that, and we're also aware of what you've said. Be under no doubt about that. And we will be, in the course of this examination before producing our report, taking a very direct look at the contrasts between Mosney and other locations. So it's part of what we intend to do. Senator, have you any further questions?
I just have one final question I'd like to maybe ask Nick, if that's okay. Just around the oversight to prevent abuse. You know, we're, as you can see here today, we're dealing with, you know, very vulnerable people. Some, you know, who arrive into this country who can't speak the language. There's no financial resources there to them. So the system has recently been brought under remit of the Ombudsman, and I just wanted to ask you, I know that there was 148 complaints made this year. Do you feel that there are adequate safeguards in place in every centre to ensure that their residents' rights are respected, but also particularly around, you know, sexual abuse and even, you know, the mental health issues that arise? So I just, you know, would love to hear what your thinking is on that.
Thank you, Senator. Nick, please.
Yeah, no, those are serious problems, and I think the testimony of everybody today has spelt that out plainly and clearly to all of us and to ourselves included. Simply the remoteness of some centres may make it difficult to access mainstream services, as has been well explained. Let's not forget also that, for example, within in terms of mental health, existing mental health services in Ireland are already stretched. GP lists can be full. You may have to travel to a GP. There has, as Lucky explained, been several incidents of suicide. I can think of 3 within the last 3 years. So there's clearly deep problems. There is a framework for that to change. The law says that we passed in June of last year, the Minister for Health shall ensure that a recipient has access to emergency health care and such health care as is necessary for the treatment of serious illnesses and mental disorders. So there is a framework, a clear legal obligation upon the state to ensure that people with such mental health problems are given proper assistance. The two organisations here today and 6 others released a statement on Sunday highlighting the fact that there is no vulnerability assessment procedure as required by that law in Ireland. We are in June, it will be 12 months since we passed that law. That, if we had a vulnerability assessment procedure, that would mean if someone were to arrive, they would be assessed and a determination would be made around what special reception needs they have. Do they have children? As all the issues around children that Donna has explained. Do they have health needs? Is it appropriate that they're accommodated where, in somewhere like Caoimhghín? That hasn't happened, and that's a clear absence or gap or non-implementation of law, and that's seriously problematic.
Thank you very much. Senator.
I just want to say thank you all so much. I just hope that you never give up the fight to really abolish direct provision centres, and we will do we have a great chair here, by the way, just want to pay credit to him, and we will do our very best to highlight the issues today that you've given us around the situation, and I just really appreciate your honesty, and it's been really an unbelievable eye-opener for us, for me, and I would have thought I would have had a fair idea as to the injustice that's going on here, but the detail that you've given us here today has been very, very important, so thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Black. Senator Niall Ó Donnghaile, please.
Thank you. And just a couple of quick observations, Chair, and then the one question from me. I want to reiterate everyone's thanks in terms of the presentation today. It's been a tough meeting, to be quite honest. I've been a member of this Justice Committee for close to 3 years now, and I have to tell you, I think Christopher made probably one of the most insightful and thoughtful contributions I've heard at this committee, and to then see him in the condition that he's in now, hearing some of these stories, I think is a bit of a wake-up call, certainly for us, on a dose of reality. I have my view on direct provision, to be honest, and it's not much good to use what my view is, to be honest, because you're living it, and you've articulated the experience of that very vividly today. I'm not as kind as my colleague, Senator Black. I think the government parties aren't represented here today. The government party isn't represented here today because they don't really care. They know full well the situation in the direct provision, because this isn't the first meeting like this. These meetings and presentations and engagements have happened consistently over a long period of years. So I think there's a dose of unfortunate reality that we need to consider as we all collectively move forward, that there are people within Irish society, Irish life, Irish government, who think it is okay that people are locked away in direct provision. I think it's fine. Who put the interests of private companies ahead of human beings, who think the culture that prevailed during, as Francis said, the period of the Magdalen laundries is actually, it's kind of okay now because we're not doing it on Irish people. Even though the same government oversees children sleeping in hotel rooms, children who are born here. So that's a culture I think we have to realise, and before we can deal with addressing and hopefully get to the stage where we abolish direct provision, I think that's a sad, unfortunate fact of Irish life that we need to challenge, because for me, to be quite honest, I think this committee's report could and probably should consist of today's meeting. Because with the greatest respect, not to take away from any other contributors, but I think the most important people in all of this that need to be heard are yourselves. I have a whole lot more I could say, but I'm very conscious of time for yourselves and for other colleagues. The question I have is, the Chair, as Senator Black rightly acknowledged, who we're very lucky to have in this regard, will lead a delegation from this committee in visiting a number of direct provision centres next month. And I remember, not to be facetious about it, but I remember when you were at school and there was inspectors or anybody coming in to visit the school, you used to be told to, you know, buck up your ideas and tidy up and, you know, put on a good show. So I would ask you to be as frank as you can be and tell us what we should be looking out for, what questions we should be asking. Your contributions today, I'm sure, will inform those of us who are going on that trip in terms, but if there are any specifics there that we should be looking out for and asking on the day, then be sure and certain we'll ask it. But if there's anything beyond what you've said already this morning, then please do let us know. And certainly I don't want to come across as being too negative there. I always go in hope. I'm always one for, Jim, who works in my office, always says light a candle as opposed to curse the dark. And certainly I think we can get to a situation where we sort this stain out, because I think it is a stain on Irish society, that this is how we're treating a nation of immigrants and asylum seekers for generations who went all over the world seeking refuge and seeking support. And I think it's a great shame. And I think if that's the message that can go from this meeting today, is that when there's people out there trying to exploit fear and ignorance and hatred, then we're duty bound to help try and inform people out there of what our fellow human beings are going through, and to shine that light on what's happening in direct provision. So I'm very grateful to you for taking the opportunity. I wish we could do more. I wish I could give you the answer today, to be quite frank. But certainly from our perspective and looking around the table, you have members here, TDs and senators, who will do their very best. But the reality is we're up against it. You're up against it. But going forward, we're up against it and breaking a political culture that thinks it's okay to do this. And I think that's certainly the greatest shame moving forward. Caoimhghín.
Thank you very much, Senator. And may I just reiterate the point that Senator O'Donnell has made. Like, if the Irish Refugee Councillor, Massey, subsequent to today's engagement, would like to submit some suggested points for, you know, to look out for, to raise. Yeah. Your contributions here today have been huge, very informative, and have helped greatly in the preparation of what we intend to do. But other things may occur subsequently, and I'm opening up the opportunity through the clerk. If you would furnish us with particular points, we would welcome that.
That's fair.
Okay. Senator Lawless, I want to say you're very welcome to have joined us here this morning. There are no other indications. Yes, Lucky.
I just want to make a comment from the Senator there. I'm glad you have this idea of visiting the centres, very much important. And you were, in your remarks there, you were saying that the people that obviously happy with the current status quo, and I would say that if I had a hotel that has been standing for 2 years, not getting any money from it, and through the arrivals of the people who seek protection, and the justice gives me the opportunity to use that hotel, and suddenly my account is on a plus and going, I'll be very happy.
Absolutely.
I'll be very, very happy. One of the suggestions that when you go to the centers, do not tell anybody. Go. You'll see the difference.
Unfortunately, that isn't unfortunately the way it will unfold. But we will keep our eyes wide open, and we will be conscious, like the analogy offered of the school inspector, that everything will be bright and shiny on the day.
That's good.
But your questions, your points that you might share with us in the interim period will be helpful. So, Rosemary, you're going to get the last word here. Well, I thought it would be Christopher. I don't know why.
Okay, I don't have on top of my head to say like what questions specifically you can ask, but I would suggest like when you meet with the managers, also try to have time privately either to meet with the residents or to meet with people who are working, like the local community who are working with the resident. Because my understanding, like where I come from, the center I'm in, the manager will tell you everything is perfect, everything is well, but things are not okay. You go in the kitchen, you're going to be told, okay, here's the kitchen, people are cooking and all that. But in the center that I'm in, mothers are struggling to go and cook their meals because they've got their small babies. They can't go with the babies in the kitchen. And by the time they find someone to mind their babies, the kitchen is closed. But if you go there during the day, you find the kitchen is functional, and you're going to have that impression that everyone is cooking. And then issues of transport. If you go there, you're going to be told, okay, we provide transport here. But our transport is being provided by different private sector as well. So we have to beg. Like just last week, we tried to keep active as much as we can. So I tried to register a couple of people for the upcoming local elections because that's one of the only rights that we have and we need to use it. So we register the people and we ask for the bus to take us. And the bus, I was told the bus will pick people at 10 o'clock in the morning and leave them at the polling station and come and pick them at 11. Now, the polling station is only like less than 10 minutes away. And Imo is not a busy place, so you're just going in quick, you vote, you're coming out like within 5 minutes. So you're having people to wait for the bus to keep them for 40 minutes. And I asked one of the employers there, I said, why did you do like this? Why didn't you at least put the bus to pick people at 11 o'clock and then come and pick them up maybe around past? And he told me like, oh, we're not obliged to do this. We're just doing you a favor. And I was upset and I told him, I said, you know what? It's either you just don't do it at all. Because you're doing like this, no one is going to be on the bus and you say people, they don't want to be active. And it goes the same thing to say integration. I'll take you back on the integration, like it's saying that, okay, asylum seekers cannot be integrated because they're not legal in the country. But then people are staying 5 years in the system. It would make sense if people are staying only a year. So really, thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosemary.
Thank you.
Well, it leaves me with nothing further to do this afternoon, but to very sincerely thank both Nick and Rosemary from the Irish Refugee Council. You've been with us before, Nick, as I remember, both of you. To thank Lucky, Bulalani, Donna, Tina, Rosemary, Christopher, and Babs. You got away with a quiet opportunity this morning, but I think you were well represented in all the contributions we heard. We thank you and we wish you peace and success in your lives, the lives before you. And we are, those of us here, very much of what we're proud to describe as Ireland of the welcomes. We believe it, and we want to live that with you. So I want to thank my committee colleagues for their participation here today. I invite you all for a group photograph just outside as a record of our morning's work, and we'd hope to have you back when we finally publish our report sometime in the autumn. So it gives me, I have nothing further to do but to say that the Joint Committee is adjourned until 9 a.m. on Wednesday, the 12th of June. Goramila Mahikov.